Hello guys, I'm Humzram Peculiar and welcome to C++ Code Answers. Please don't forget to like this video and to subscribe to the channel. Also, please click the notifications button. This is to allow you not to miss any new video upload. Today we're working a user-defined function chapter problem, and our problem reads as thus. Write a program to convert the time from 24-hour notation to 12-hour notation and vice versa. Your program must be menu-driven, giving the user the choice of converting the time between two notations. Furthermore, your program must contain at least the following function: a function to convert time from 24-hour notation to 12-hour notation, a function to convert the time from 12-hour notation to 24-hour notation, a function to display the choices, functions to get the input, and functions to display the results. For 12-hour time notation, your program must display AM or PM. Straightforward, right? What the program should simply do is, suppose you enter the time in 24 hours format. The program must just output it in a 12 hours notation, and vice versa if you enter 12 hours notation. But we must include AM and PM in the 12 hours formatting. The ideal thing would be to draft our way of solving the problem, but we'll do so in the code. So let's open our IDE and get working. Hash include iostream for our cout, cin, and so on. We will be returning PM and AM for our hours notation, which is a text or a string. So hash include string. Namespace std for the same name functions, classes, and etc. in the libraries and that we may be declaring. Just as when we enter the main function, we start off with declarations. Before working with any function, we declare them as well. So just before we go to our main function, we declare the functions which we will use. This is called the function prototyping, and it is done here so that when it is called in the main function, it is known. Remember, C++ is line operational, meaning the third line will only run true if the second line is true. The question has provided us with the minimum functions we should have. We are told that the user must have the choice of converting the time between the two notations, and we are told to include the functions to display the choices. So declare it here. Once user chooses his conversion choice, this function will run true. Void display choice. It's void because it just displays and returns no value. Also, it has no parameters as it needs no values from the main function. The parameters carries a value from the another function to this function that you're working on. Once the choice is made, the user must enter their current time. As such, we need the function to obtain the time. On our problem question, we see that we can have more than one input function. The S in bracketed functions to get the input. So we'll have functions to get the hours and another one for getting the minutes. Both the hours and the minutes are integers. As such, the functions are declared as int, and the return will be hours and the minutes respectively. So we need no specific value from the main function. As such, empty parameters. Once the user has entered their current time, it's time for the conversion. And we are either converting to 24 hours notation or to 12. So we'll be having a function for each, converting to 24 hours and the other converting to 12 hours notation. And the functions, we can see them mentioned on the problem question also. These functions are integers because they are converting time, which holds minutes, and hours, which are both integers. The parameters have values because for conversions we need the hours which we entered in another function, so the parameters will be carrying these values. The minutes need no conversion as they remain the same whether in the 12-hour notation or 24-hour notation. So each conversion will just need the hours that were entered in another function for conversion. Having converted, we'll be displaying the output. The problem question did mention that there should be functions to display the results. Also having them bracketed as, meaning we can have more than one function for the results displaying. We will have display for 24 hours notation and the other for 12 hours notation. These functions just display so they are void, returning no value. The functions have both the entered hours and hours from the other function in order to display them, so the parameters need to have these values. And that's all the functions we'll be building on our program. There are values that are used for most of the functions that are outside of the main functions. These values are called global variables, meaning they are not just for a specific function, but they are for more than just one function. If they were for just a specific value, they'd be declared in that specific function, but now they are global functions because they are being used outside of the main function in the other functions. Global functions are declared here outside the main function. For this problem, we seem to be having global variables. When we display choices, we will be displaying according to the conversion choice. If you choose this, you convert to 12 hours notation, and if you choose that, you convert to 24 hours notation. So conversion choice is a global variable used outside the main function. Also, for converting functions, we will be using hours to convert. These hours are what the functions will return. Both the 24 hours and the 12-hour function will need these hours to return in their respective notation. So the final converted time here is declared as a global variable. And for the 12-hour format, we need to display AM and PM according to the time. This will be stored as a string, so we declare it here, and that's all the global variables we'll need. If however we do discover that we may need any more, we'll come up here to write them. Done with the declarations. Now to the main function. Now in here we'll be calling functions. Operations are done in their respective functions. Remember, with functions, we have a clean code. So the main function just calls functions, no operations. Just as always, declarations first. But what are we declaring? The hint here is to look at the function's prototypes. And in there, we'll look at the function parentheses. The to 12 and the to 24 hour functions have an integer variable hours in their parentheses. Remember, as this is because only the hours matter. So this int is for hours. When it comes to time notation, the minutes don't need no conversion. And the displaying functions have two integer variables also, which is the hours and the minutes. When you call these functions in the main function, because they have values in the parentheses, even when they are called, they must be having these values. Also, for the empty parentheses functions, they must be empty when they are called in the main function. So what we need to do is declare hours, minutes in the main function, so that when we call those functions with parentheses, we can call them with these values. And hours and minutes. Let's welcome the user with a nice welcome message. Remember the question said, give the user the choice of converting the time between two notations. So press 1 to convert to 24 hours notation, and 2 to convert to 12 hours notation. The problem question said that there should be a function for displaying the choices. Now, after having made the conversion choice, that function is called here to display the choices. So now let's call it here. And now let's go build this function outside the main function. Because here in the main function, it's just calling it. Void display choice. It's got empty parenthesis. Now here, if you said you are converting to 12 hours, it just displays a message informing so, and the like for 24 hours notation. So if conversion choice is 1, see out the message. And if conversion choice is 2, see out the 12-hour notation choice message. This function is void, so it returns no value. It's just outputting through the cout. Now user has entered their choice of conversion. Now they must enter their current time so that it is converted. So we call the input functions in the main function. The input hours and the input minutes function. So that the values that the users entered in the functions will be passed to this hours and the minutes variables. We will call the functions through assignment. Hours is equals to input hours function. Minutes is equals to input minutes function. This is so these variables, hours, minutes, which were declared in the main function, will have these values that will be obtained through these functions. You can call these functions just as we did the display functions, but you'll see later why we specifically did them this way. Well, that's if you didn't understand this previous explanation I just gave. We just called the functions here. Now let's go build these input functions. Int input hours, We're inputting hours, so let's declare it here. Prompt input. Cin. Our function is not void, meaning that it's a return type function. It returns the hours we just obtained. This return statement makes sure we can access this value in the main function. Remember that here we are outside the main function, which is the driver code. And these hours which we are returning will be passed to that hours variable in the main function. Remember that assignment we just made? Yeah. Now let's build the input of the minutes function. We are inputting minutes, so let's declare it. Remember I said if a variable will only be used in that function, you can declare it specifically in that function. Now prompt input. This function returns the minutes we just obtained. This return also makes sure that we can access this value in the main function. Remember, we are outside the main function. And the minutes will be passed to the mins variable in the main function. Yeah, remember that assignment? And now the user has input their current time, the hours, and the minutes. Having done so, the program should now do the conversion, meaning that now we call the conversion function in the main function. But remember, here we don't just call a function. A function that's being called is the one which was chosen by the user. If the user chose option 1, the 24-hour function should be called, just as if the user chose option 2, the 12-hour function should be called. So we'll call them with the if-else conditions statements. If user choose option 1, call the 24-hour function. The hours which the user input in another function in the input function will be used for conversion. So we pass them in these parameters. Now you see why we assigned those values? So that we use these variables to carry that input values. The display one also, since the conversion is already done. The display uses both the minutes and the hours, so we include them in the parameters. Also, you see in the prototype, we had two int data types for them in the display function. And for conversion choice 2, call the 12-hour function. Even here, the hours which the user input in another function, the input function, will be used for conversion. So we pass them in these parameters and we display. The display uses both the minutes and hours, so we include them in parameters. If we add more parentheses than what was declared in the prototype, it's a function overload. Also, if we add less parentheses parameters than we had in the prototype, it's a function error. Now we've called the functions in the order they should be called in the main function. We can now close off the main function. System pause. Return 0. Let's go build these 4 functions we just called. Let's begin with building the 24-hour function. It has parameters in the parentheses. We'll use a name variable which is not used already, just not to confuse the compiler. No worries, this is just the value holder for the value the user input. We are just carrying it from the main to here to enable conversion. Because this is a conversion to 24 hours, it means we entered our hours and the minutes in a 12-hour notation. So we need to know if it's AM or PM so that we make a relevant conversion to 24 hours. Now let's prompt user for search. We'll start with the conditions of when the time of the day is PM, then user may enter in caps or small letters. The time entered in 24-hour notations are still the same for 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 12-hour clock on a 12-hour notation. So the program must be informed when it is PM, so that from 12 PM to 11 PM, it must continue incrementing this time until 11 o'clock PM, such that your entered 1 o'clock at PM is 13 hours and your 2 PM is 14 hours, 3 PM becomes 15 hours, and so on. It looks like we'll be needing a loop here for the increments. Given that it is PM, our range is from 1 PM to 11 PM. From 1 PM to 11 PM, it must add on from the 12. If 1 PM is 13 hours, 2 is 14 hours, 3 is 15 hours until the hours which are requested. So we start at 1 PM. And suppose you enter 3 PM, it has to end there. So our ending point is at this current hours which you will have entered. Our increment is by 1 from 1 PM, 2 PM, and so on. So let's increment. So that at every time count, it must increment this time from 12 to the upper number. Let's increment it here, final time, such that 1 PM becomes 13, 2 PM becomes 14 until the entered time. Let's increment it here. And oh, we didn't declare it up there. So let's declare the variable holder for the increment here. It's a 12, because from 1 PM it will add on to a 13 by increment. Please check our repetition control structure playlist to get an idea of how loops work. Now what we have is, suppose the user entered 4 PM, the program at 1 will increment final time to 13, then at 2 it will increment it to 14, then at 3 it will increment it to 15, then finally at 4 it will increment it to 16. This is for the whenever time of the day is PM. But when it's AM, the time is just the same way in 24 hours notation. This is when it's the morning hours of the day. So else final time is equals to current hours. And whether PM or AM, we return the final time. So let's return the final time. And now let's build the to 12-hour conversion function. In here, the user entered the time in 24 hours notation to convert it to 12 hours notation. When the time is 13 hours to 23 hours, the time must be converted such that 13 hours is 1 p.m., 14 hours is 2 p.m., 15 hours is 3 p.m., and so on. So it must increment from an initial time of 0, making a 13 a 1, incremented from 0, a 14 a 2, incremented from that 1, and so on. So declare the initial variable to increment here to 0. Let's start off when it's morning. This is the hours from midnight to 11 a.m. In this notation, the hours remain the same in 12-hour notation from 1 to 11 o'clock, so not much work. If current hours is greater than 0 and less than 12, which is the morning hours, there is no time change in the 12 hours notation, just that the day is set to AM. So day is equals to AM, and time remains the same. Now the PM period. If the time is greater than 12, and less than 24, which is the PM hours, the day here must specify it to be PM. When time is 13 hours to 23 hours, the time must be converted such that 13 hours is 1 p.m., 14 hours is 2 p.m., 15 hours is 3 p.m., and etc. We need a loop, just as we had in the previous function of conversion. Our range here is from when it's 13 hours to 23 hours, the PM hours. So let's create our loop. Start at 13. Less than the supposed entered time. And we keep adding on. Now, as we had declared the final time as 0, here we increment it, so that at 13 it goes to a 1, and 14 it goes to a 2, and so on. And the function returns the final time, which is being converted in this function. Now we've converted, we need to display. We've already called the functions in the main function, so now it's just for us to build them. Let's build the 24 hours display function. Void display to 24 hours. It has two integer parameter variables, which is the hours and the minutes to display. Now, to have an appealing output, let's display both the current time notation and one converted. So here, we'll firstly display the 12 hours notation. Which is the one that the user entered. Then see out the 24 hours notation time. It's void, so no return value, we just displaying. Now build the to 12-hour notations function. We display the 24 hours time first, since it's the entered time. Then see out the 12 hours notation, the converted time. And we are done. There we have our function prototypes at the top, where we've declared all functions we will use. Let's go view our functions at the bottom. The display choice, displaying notation choices according to the user conversion choice. Then the input functions, the one for hours and the one for minutes. After input, we convert. So there's our conversion functions. One to convert to 12 hours notation and another to convert to 24 hours notation. After conversion, we display the results, so there are our display functions. Now you see why final time is a global variable. It was used outside the main function and by other functions quite a lot of times. Now let's look at our main function. You see we have no operations, just called our functions in the order that they are supposed to run. Functions make it easy for another to read your code. Just imagine if all that code which is in the other functions was all in the main function. It would be a mess, right? Now let's save our code. Let's compile to see if we have any errors. We have an error on line 39. That's not how we declared our minutes in the main function. Let's remove the I. Another error on line 52. Oh, line 51 didn't end well with a semicolon. Let's end line. Great, now no more errors. Let's choose conversion type 1, convert to 24 hours, and enter 5 hours and 55 minutes. Say we are P p.m. and there it's 5:55 p.m. in 12 hours and 17:55 in 24 hours. Let's do our next try. Let's do conversion choice 1 again. Say 3 hours 22 minutes. Let's do AM this time around, and there in 12 hours notation is 3:22 AM and in 24 hours notation is 3:22. Now let's go try converting to 24 hours notation. Choice 2, 8 hours. Oh, my entered minutes. Well, let's just, in 24 hours it's 8:30 and 8:30 AM in 12 hours, which is correct because in 24-hour notation the morning hours are 1, 2, 3 until 12, and then in 12-hour notations is the same with an AM notation. Now let's try the evening hours. 14 hours 12 minutes. 24 hours is 14:12. In 12 hours is 2:12 p.m., which is correct. And one more example. 18 hours 19 minutes, and in 24 hours is 18:19, and in 12 hours it's 06:19 p.m., which is correct. Great! Our program runs perfectly. I hope you followed through. Just play the video a couple of times to get to understand the solution. That's it for me today, guys. Don't forget to communicate with me on our email address gg.ntehelang@gmail.com. I hope you keep coding. See you on our next video.